Hey, my name's Jamie Walker. I'm 26, and 3 weeks ago, I pulled into a quiet little town just outside Bend, Oregon, with everything I owned crammed into the back of a rusty Ford van. The job at Harlan's Woodworks had come through a small shop specializing in custom furniture for vacation cabins, and I figured it was my shot at starting over. No more bouncing between dead-end gigs back in Idaho. No more sleeping on friends' couches. Just me, a steady paycheck, and a fresh zip code. The problem was, the paycheck hadn't started yet, and the rent in Bend was brutal. I'd been parking the van wherever I could find a dark corner behind the hardware store, under the awning of a shuttered gas station, once even in the lot of a 24-hour laundromat that smelled like bleach and regret. I told myself it was temporary. A week, maybe 2. I'd scrape together first and last month's rent, find a room, and be fine. That plan lasted until the night the sky cracked open. It was late October, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as slam sideways, turning the windshield into a waterfall no wipers could keep up with. I'd pulled under the overhang of an old feed and seed store on the edge of town, the kind of place that probably hadn't sold a bag of grain since the 90 seconds. The lot was empty, the streetlights flickering like they were on their last breath. I killed the engine, reclined the seat as far as it would go, and tried to ignore the way the cold seeped through the floorboards. Sleep wasn't coming. The rain drummed on the roof like it had a personal grudge. My phone was at 3%, the battery pack dead, and the only thing keeping me company was the low hum of a classic rock station fading in and out. I was halfway through a stale granola bar when the knock came, 3 sharp taps on the driver's side window. I jolted upright, heart kicking. Through the blurred glass, I saw a figure in a dark green raincoat hood up one hand, raised in a cautious wave. I cracked the window an inch, rain spitting in. "You okay in there?" The voice was low, steady, cutting through the storm without shouting. Female. Not young, not old. "You can't stay here. The owner calls the cops on overnight parkers." I wiped condensation from the inside of the glass. "I'm not. I'm just waiting out the rain. I'll move in a minute." She didn't budge. "It's supposed to pour until morning, and the temperature's dropping." A pause. "Look, I've got a cottage out back at my place. It's empty. One night, no questions." I stared. People didn't do this. Not in real life. Not to strangers who looked like they'd been living in their clothes for a week. "I can pay you and no need." She stepped back, rain dripping from the hem of her coat. "Follow me." Should have thanked her, rolled up the window, and driven off to find another lot. But the van smelled like wet dog and desperation. And the idea of a roof that didn't leak felt like a miracle I didn't deserve. I started the engine. She led the way on foot, a tall silhouette under a golf umbrella, moving fast enough that I had to creep along in first gear to keep up. We turned off the main drag, down a narrow lane, lined with fir trees and craftsman houses set back from the road. Her place was a 2-story cedar-shingled home with a wide front porch and warm light spilling from the windows. Behind it, separated by a low picket fence gone silver with age, sat a smaller structure, single-story, maybe 600 square feet, with a brick chimney and a single window glowing amber. She waited while I parked on the gravel strip beside the fence. Rain hammered the roof of the van as I grabbed my duffel and the one clean shirt I owned. She didn't offer to help, just held the gate open and led me up a flagstone path slick with pine needles. The cottage door opened with a soft creak. Inside smelled of cedar and something herbal, mint maybe. A small wood stove crackled in the corner, throwing heat and shadows across mismatched furniture. A sagging plaid couch, a pine table with 2 chairs, books stacked like Jenga on every surface. A kettle sat on a 2-burner stove, steam curling from its spout. "Bathrooms through there," she said, nodding toward a narrow hallway. "Towels are clean, tea's in the tin by the sink." She peeled off her raincoat, revealing a simple gray sweater and jeans, hair the color of damp sand twisted into a loose knot. Up close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way she held herself, like someone used to, being alone but not lonely. I stood dripping on the mat, suddenly aware of how I must look, unshaven eyes red from too many nights in the van clothes, carrying the faint stink of sawdust and cheap coffee. "I'm Jamie," I said. "Jamie Walker. Claire Benton." She poured hot water into a mug. the scent of peppermint rising between us. "You're not from here. Just moved. Starting at Harlan's Woodworks on Monday." She nodded like that, explained everything. One night she repeated, but softer this time, like she was reminding herself. "There's a spare key on the hook if you need to lock up when you leave." I took the mug she offered, fingers, brushing hers for half a second. Her hand was warm, calloused in places. Teacher's hands, maybe from years of gripping chalk or stacking books. "Thank you," I said. "I owe you." "You don't." She moved toward the door, pulling her coat back on. "Get some sleep, Jamie Walker." The door closed behind her with a quiet click. I stood there, a long moment, steam from the tea fogging my glasses, listening to the rain ease from a roar to a whisper against the roof. The cottage felt too good to be real, too warm, too safe, too much like something I'd forgotten I was allowed to want. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything I hadn't planned on. The first morning in the cottage, I woke to the sound of birds arguing outside the window and the faint smell of wood smoke. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, turning dust motes into slow-moving gold. For a second, I forgot where I was then. The memory of rain on the van roof came back, followed by the click of Claire's door. I sat up, heart thudding like I'd overslept for something important. The spare key was still on the hook. A note lay beneath it on the pine table, written in neat, slanted handwriting. "Coffee's in the jar. Help yourself. See." No smiley face, no instructions, just that. I showered in the tiny bathroom hot water that didn't run out, soap that smelled like pine, and changed into the clean shirt I'd been saving. The mirror showed a stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes that looked older than 26. I shaved with a disposable razor I found in the drawer, nicking my chin twice. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp, the ground still damp. Claire's main house sat quiet, curtains drawn. I left the key under the mat like a thief, returning a favor, and drove to the woodshop. Harlan was a grizzled ex-Marine who believed in three things: good coffee, straight cuts, and not asking questions. He handed me an apron, pointed to a stack of cherry planks, and said, "Show me what you can do." By the end of the day, my hands were raw. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat and sawdust, but I had a paycheck stub in my pocket and the beginnings of a dining table that didn't wobble. I felt almost human. That night, the rain returned softer this time, a steady patter on the cottage roof. I meant to pack my duffel and start looking for rooms. There was a bulletin board at the grocery store, a website for short-term rentals. But the idea of leaving felt heavier than it should. I told myself it was the storm, told myself I'd decide tomorrow. Claire knocked around 8 too-sharp raps that made me jump. She stood on the step in a navy rain jacket holding a paper bag. "Leftover lasagna," she said. I made too much. I took the bag. Our fingers brushed again, longer this time. "You didn't have to." "I know." She glanced past me into the cottage. "You fixed the fence." The back pickets had been leaning like drunks after the windstorm. I'd spent an hour after work nailing them straight, more out of gratitude than necessity. It was bugging me. She nodded, rain dripping from her hood. "Dinner's at 7 tomorrow if you're around. No pressure." Then she was gone, swallowed by the dark and the drizzle. I ate the lasagna, standing over the sink, steam fogging the window. It was better than anything I'd tasted in months: ricotta, spinach, a hint of nutmeg. I washed the plate, dried. It set it back exactly where I'd found it. The cottage felt less like a borrowed space and more like a pause between breaths. The next few days settled into a rhythm. I'd leave before dawn, work until my shoulders burned, come back to find small signs Claire had been there, a new stack of firewood by the stove, a library book on the table with a bookmark halfway through. She never lingered, never asked where I'd been or why I hadn't left. I started leaving notes too. "Thanks for the coffee, Jay," or "Fix the loose board on the porch. Hope that's okay." One evening I came home to find the porch light rewired, the bulb steady instead of flickering. A post-it on the switch. "You mentioned it bothered you." I laughed out loud, the sound startling in the quiet. Friday, I finished early. Harlan clapped me on the back, said, "You've got hands, kid. Don't waste them." I stopped at the market, bought a bottle of red wine that cost more than my daily lunch, and walked back through streets glazed with sunset. Claire was in the garden, kneeling in the mud, planting bulbs in a bed bordered by river stones. She wore old jeans and a flannel shirt sleeves rolled high dirt under her nails. Thought teachers had weekends off. I said, "She didn't look up. Some of us grade papers. Some of us pretend the earth forgives us." She patted soil around a tulip bulb, then stood brushing her hands on her thighs. "You're early." Brought a peace offering. I held up the wine. Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "Come on, I've got a corkscrew." We ate on her back porch, lasagna reheated salad from the garden bread, still warm from the oven. The wine was cheap but honest. We talked about wood grain and poetry, about the way cherry darkens with age and how some stories only make sense years after you live them. She didn't ask why I was still in the cottage. I didn't offer. Later, dishes done, we sat on the porch steps. Rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pine and distant wood smoke. Fireflies blinked in the hedge. I asked the question that had been circling since the first night. "Why'd you let me stay?" Claire leaned back on her elbows, staring at the sky. "I didn't." "Not really." A pause. "People think kindness needs a reason. It doesn't. Sometimes you just see someone caring too much, and you set one thing down for them." I turned to look at her. Moonlight cut across her cheekbone, the faint scar near her temple I hadn't noticed before. "You don't even know me. I know the way you look at a broken fence like it's a promise you can keep." She met my eyes. "That's enough for one night." I wanted to argue. Tell her about the failed business, the girlfriend who left when the money ran out, the way I'd driven west until the road ended, but the word stuck. Instead, I said, "I'm not good at promises. Neither am I." She stood, brushed dirt from her jeans. "But I'm good at second nights." She left me on the steps with the rest of the wine and the echo of her voice. I didn't sleep much. The cottage felt different now. Not a shelter, but a question I hadn't answered yet. The nights grew longer, the way they do when November tips toward winter. I'd come back from the shop with sawdust in my hair and the smell of linseed oil on my skin, and the cottage would be lit from within like a lantern. Claire left the porch light on now. Not the flickering one I'd fixed, but a new bulb, steady and warm. I told myself it was for safety. Told myself a lot of things. We fell into habits without meaning to. I'd shower, change into the one pair of jeans that wasn't stained, and cross the yard to her back door. She'd be at the stove or curled in the armchair with a stack of essays, red pen moving like a metronome. We didn't plan dinners. They just happened. Pasta, with whatever vegetables were wilting in the crisper. Chili thick enough to stand a spoon in. Once a roast chicken that filled the house with rosemary and made me think of my mom's kitchen before everything went sideways. Conversation came easy, then hard, then easy again. She talked about books the way other people talked about. Old lovers, half fondness, half exasperation. I told her about the table I was building for a couple in Sun River. How the grain in the walnut looked like rivers when light hit it right. She listened like it mattered. No one had listened to me like that in years. One Thursday, the power went out just after dusk. Wind howled through the firs, rattling the windows. I found candles in a drawer, half-burned tapers from some long-ago dinner party, and carried them into the living room. Claire was on the couch, knees drawn up, a blanket around her shoulders. The fire in the wood stove painted her face in shifting gold. "Storm's angry tonight," I said, setting a candle on the coffee table. "It's allowed." She watched the flames. Everything's allowed to be angry sometimes. I sat on the hearth close enough to feel the heat on my shins. The room smelled of wood smoke and the lavender soap she used. Outside, branches scraped the siding like fingers trying to get in. "You ever get scared?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Of what? Being alone. Really alone. Not just quiet house alone, but the kind where no one would notice if you didn't come back. She was quiet so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then every day for 5 years. Then one night, a stranger knocked on my window in the rain, and I stopped being scared of the wrong things. I looked at her, then really looked. The way her hair fell across one eye when she read. The small scar on her collarbone I'd noticed when she reached for a high shelf. The way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. She wasn't beautiful in the way magazines sold. She was beautiful in the way a well-worn book is, pages soft, spine-cracked story still holding. Claire. She met my eyes. Candlelight flickered across her face, turning green irises almost black. "I should have left a week ago," I said. "You still can." "I don't want to." The words hung between us heavier than the storm. She didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at me like she was seeing something she'd forgotten how to name. I stood across the 2 steps to the couch. She didn't pull away when I sat beside her. The blanket smelled like her tea and wool and something I couldn't place. I took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but they curled around mine like they'd been waiting. "I'm not good at this," I said. "Neither am I." We stayed like that, hands linked fire, popping wind, screaming. At some point she leaned her head on my shoulder. I felt the weight of it in my bones. Not heavy, necessary. Later minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. She stood and led me down the hall. Her bedroom was small. A book stacked on the dresser, a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Moonlight came through the window in pale bars. She lit another candle on the nightstand, then turned to me. "I don't want promises," she said. "I don't want tomorrow spelled out. Just tonight." I nodded. Words felt too big. Afterward, we didn't speak. She fell asleep first, one arm draped across my waist, fingers curled against my ribs. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm move east, and realized I hadn't thought about the va. Rain had stopped. The world smelled washed clean. Claire was already up, standing at the kitchen window in an oversized sweater, coffee mug in hand. I padded in barefoot the floor, cool under my feet. "Hi," I said. She turned, eyes soft. "Hi." We didn't talk about what happened. Didn't need to. I made toast while she scrambled eggs. We ate at the table, knees brushing under the wood. Outside, a robin landed on the fence I'd fixed, tilting its head like it approved. That night I moved my duffel from the cottage to her spare room. Not because she asked, because leaving it behind felt like lying. The lines blurred after that. I still worked at Harlan's, came home with wood shavings in my pockets. She still graded papers, left red ink like blood trails across teenage poetry, but the evenings belonged to us. We read aloud, her voice steady on Neruda Mines, stumbling over frost. We cooked together, arguing over Garley. Once we drove to the coast, just to watch the waves crash, eating sandwiches in the car while fog rolled in. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years. About the business I'd sunk my savings into the partner who'd bailed with the money. About the way my dad's hands shook now when he tried to hold a hammer. She listened without fixing, without pity. Just listened. She told me about the husband who'd promised forever and delivered 3 years of silence. About the miscarriage no one at school knew about. About the novel she'd started a dozen times and abandoned because who wants to read about a woman learning to be alone? "I do," I said. She looked at me, then eyes bright. "You already are." Some nights we didn't make it to the bedroom. We'd fall asleep on the couch, her head in my lap, my fingers in her hair. I'd wake to the sound of her breathing steady and real, and feel something settle in my chest I hadn't known was broken. I knew it couldn't last. Not like this. Not without questions. But for the first time in years, I wasn't running toward or away from anything. I was just here. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in early December, the kind of gray morning where the sky forgets to lift. I was in the shop sanding the final curve on a headboard when Harlan handed me his phone. "Your girl's in the paper?" he said, voice flat. It wasn't the Bend Bulletin, too small for that, but the community newsletter every neighborhood got whether they wanted it or not. A grainy photo me leaving Claire's house at dawn, duffel over my shoulder, her silhouette in the doorway. The caption read, "Local teachers, unusual house guest raises eyebrows." No names, but everyone knew. By noon, the whispers had teeth. Harlan's wife texted him from the grocery store. That Walker boy still living in Claire Benton's backyard. A customer canceled an order for a crib. Didn't feel right with the rumors. I drove home with my stomach in knots. Radio off, the silence louder than any song. Claire's car was in the drive when I got there. She sat at the kitchen table, papers spread like a crime scene, a letter from the school district centered under her palm. Her face was pale but composed the way a lake looks right before it freezes. "They're suspending me pending investigation," she said without looking up. "Inappropriate relationship with a non-student adult. Conflict of interest, the usual garbage." I dropped my keys on the counter. They clattered too loud. "Because of me. Because of us." She finally met my eyes. "A parent saw you leave last week. Reported it to the principal. Said it set a poor example for the kids." I laughed to sound like breaking glass. I'm not a kid. You're 13 years younger. That's all they see. She pushed the letter toward me. They want a meeting tomorrow. I can fight it, but you shouldn't have to. I paced to the window, staring at the cottage. My cottage. Our cottage. Its windows dark. I'll move out. Tell them it was temporary. A favor. Nothing more. She stood chair scraping. And then what? I go back to pretending I'm fine alone. You go back to sleeping in your van. Her voice cracked on the last word. I'm tired of pretending, Jamie. I turned. She was closer than I expected, eyes bright with something fiercer than tears. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to stay and let me choose this. Let me choose us. I wanted to tell her about the canceled orders, the sideways looks at the lumberyard, the way Harlan's silence had weight now. But her hand found mine, fingers threading tight, and the words died. That night we didn't sleep. We sat on the porch step, sharing a blanket, watching frost form on the grass. She told me about the first time her ex-husband forgot their anniversary, how she'd cooked anyway, eaten alone, washed the dishes while he slept on the couch. I told her about the night my business partner cleaned out the accounts, how I'd driven until the gaslight blinked, too ashamed to call anyone. I thought loneliness was a phase, she said. Turns out it's a habit. You're the first thing that broke it. I kissed her, then slow and deliberate tasting coffee and the faint salt of unshed tears. We went inside when the cold bit too hard, made love on the living room rug because the bedroom felt too far. Afterward, she traced the scar on my shoulder, an old table saw mishap, and said, "If I lose my job, at least I'll lose it for something real." The meeting was worse than we imagined. The principal, a thin man with a tie too tight, read from a prepared statement. Community standards, professional boundaries, appearance of impropriety. Parents in the audience nodded like dashboard dolls. One woman, mother of a senior in Claire's AP Lit class, stood and said, "We trusted you with our children. How can we trust you now?" Claire didn't flinch. "You trusted me to teach them honesty. I'm living it." They voted to extend the suspension indefinitely. She came home hollow-eyed but unbroken. I was in the garage planning a board I didn't need sawdust coating my throat. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "I'm out," she said. Effective immediately. I set the plane down. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She stepped inside, ran a finger along the half-finished rocker I'd been secretly building for her porch. "I'm not." We didn't talk about next steps. Didn't need to. That night she cooked nothing. We ordered pizza, ate it straight from the box on the living room floor, grease staining the rug. She laughed when I got sauce on my chin. The world outside could burn. We had this. The rumors peaked and faded. Kids stopped whispering in the halls. Claire wasn't there to whisper about. Harlan gave me fewer hours than none, citing slow season. I didn't fight it. The cottage became our world, mornings with coffee and silence, afternoons with sandpaper and stories, nights with the stove crackling and her head on my chest. One evening, she came back from the library with a stack of composition books. "For the kids who still want to write," she said. "I'll teach them here. No grades, no rules." I converted the garage into a workshop, hers and mine. She set up a folding table by the window, strung fairy lights above it. I built shelves for her books, a desk from reclaimed barnwood. The first class was 3 students. A quiet boy who wrote horror, a girl obsessed with sonnets, a senior who wanted to publish before graduation. They came on Saturdays, left with ink-stained fingers and hope in their eyes. I took commissions through word of mouth, rocking chairs, coffee tables, a crib for a couple who didn't care where I slept. Money was tight, but we made it work. Claire sold her first short story to a literary magazine for $200. We celebrated with grocery store champagne and sex on the kitchen table. Winter deepened. Snow dusted the fence I'd fixed, turned the garden to white hush. We didn't talk about the future in grand terms. No wedding plans, no 5-year visions. Just small promises. "I'll fix the leaky faucet tomorrow. I'll make soup if you grade those essays." They were enough. One night in January, power out again. We lay in bed, listening to the wind. She traced circles on my chest. "Do you regret staying?" I thought of the van that canceled orders, the life I'd left behind. Not for a second. She was quiet a long time. Then, "Good, because I'm keeping you." Outside snow kept falling, covering the world in clean slate. Inside, the stove glowed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. It already had, and we were still standing. Spring came slow to the high desert, the way it always does in Central Oregon. Snow melted into the garden beds, revealing green shoots Claire had planted months earlier. Tulips, daffodils, a stubborn rosebush she swore would bloom if we just gave it time. The cottage roof no longer leaked. I'd patched it with cedar shingles left over from a client's deck. The garage smelled of sawdust and lemon oil, the scent of work that paid and work that mattered. Claire's Saturday writing classes grew from 3 kids to 8, then 12. They spilled out of the garage into the backyard on warm days. Notebooks balanced on knees, arguing over metaphors and whether zombies could feel regret. She never charged more than what parents could afford. Sometimes nothing. One girl, Maya, sold her first poem to a teen anthology and dedicated it to the teacher who believed stories don't need permission. I built furniture the way other people breathed. A dining table for the couple who'd ordered the crib. They sent photos of their newborn asleep on it. A bookshelf for the library that fit perfectly into an alcove no one else had measured right. Word spread. Harlan called once, gruff voice through the phone. "You taking my customer's walker?" I told him I was just filling the gaps he'd left. He laughed, said maybe he'd retire after all. Morning started the same. Claire up first, kettle whistling while I stumbled in hair, sticking up, reaching for the coffee grinder. She'd slide a mug across the counter without looking black, no sugar, the way I liked it. I'd pour her tea, peppermint, or chamomile, depending on the day. We'd sit at the table, newspapers spread between us, her foot hooked around my ankle under the wood. No words needed. Just the quiet certainty of 2 people who'd learned the shape of each other's silence. One afternoon in May, I came in from the shop to find her at the desk. I'd built sunlight striping the floor through the open garage door. Papers surrounded her like fallen leaves. She looked up, eyes bright. "It's done," she said. I wiped sawdust from my hands. "The novel," she nodded, pushed a stack of pages toward me. The title page read, "The Stranger in the Rain" by Claire Benton. Below it, in smaller type for J.W., "Who Stayed?" I read the first page standing there, grease still under my nails. It started with a man in a van, rain on the windshield, a knock in the dark. My throat tightened. "You used us," I said. "I used the truth." She stood, came around the desk. "It's not about you. It's about what happens when someone opens a door they didn't have to." I set the pages down, pulled her close. She smelled of ink and the rose soap she'd started making from garden petals. "Publish it," I said against her hair. "I will, if you'll build me a better desk." "This one wobbles." We laughed, the sound echoing off the rafters where I'd hung her students' drawings, stick figure teachers' crooked hearts, one careful sketch of a man planing wood. Summer brought heat and tourists, and the smell of pine sap thick in the air. We took the van, my van, now with a fresh coat of paint and a mattress in the back, up to the Cascades. Camped by a lake no one else seemed to know about. Swam naked at dusk, her laughter carrying across the water when I yelped at the cold. Made love under stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. She traced constellations on my chest and named one after us, the open door. Back home the rosebush bloomed, deep red, stubborn perfect. Claire cut one flower, put it in a mason jar on the kitchen table. It lasted 2 weeks, petals dropping one by one until only the scent remained. We never got married, never felt the need. The town stopped whispering eventually. New scandals took their place. Harlan retired, sold the shop to a kid from Portland who kept my number on speed dial. Claire's book came out in paperbacks, sold enough for a second printing and a reading at the local bookstore, where Maya introduced her voice, cracking with pride. One October evening, the anniversary of the night I knocked on her window, we sat on the porch steps. Same blanket, same chill in the air. The garden was going to sleep, leaves turning gold. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Still glad you stayed?" she asked. I thought of the van rusting behind the garage, the life I'd left like an old skin. Thought of the table I was building, now a gift for Maya's graduation oak with inlaid maple leaves. Thought of Claire's hand in mine, calloused from gardening, steady as ever. "Every damn day," I said. She smiled, the kind that started in her eyes and ended in the curve of her mouth. Good, because I'm keeping the key. We didn't need more. The cottage had become ours without ceremony. No moving trucks, no vows, just the slow accumulation of shared mornings, shared silences, shared storms. The world outside kept spinning, but inside, our fence-line time moved at the speed of tea cooling and wood curing. Sometimes people ask how we met. We say, funny story. There was a rainstorm. They laugh, wait for the punchline. We just smile and let it go. Love doesn't always need explaining. Sometimes it just needs a door left open, a light left on, and two people brave enough to walk through.